Hello, and welcome to the last course in the Yellow Belt program of the Lyall Business System. The topic is A3 thinking. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to go through in the A3 thinking module is a Business Week presentation from the Best Plans Conference of 2009.
How do we look at things from a new lens, from a new perspective, from a new way of thinking, and get often fundamentally different answers? Now, I'm going to contradict myself right off the bat, because what I'm going to tell you is that my title says Developing People with A3 Thinking. So the first part, absolutely agree with. We are all about developing people. That's one of the key things that we're trying to accomplish here. But I'm actually going to tell you that there is no such thing as A3 thinking. Now, in reference to my friends, Durwood Sobek and Art Smalley, who wrote a book, A3 Thinking, and John Shook, who wrote a book about A3 Thinking. What I really mean to say is that A3 is just a tool. It's lean thinking that we really have to apply. And that lean thinking goes with us every day, and we either develop that thinking and apply it, or we don't. And that's really what we're after. There's no magic in A3. All it is a tool. You pick up that tool and you use it, and you're not going to get a fundamentally different result. What's going to give you a different result is the thinking that you use. So A3 is simply a tool that helps us apply that thinking. That's what it really accomplishes. And so that's what we're really going to be talking about. So a real quick agenda. I must have pushed the wrong button there. There we go. So just a little bit of background about why we even talk about this. Kind of spent a little bit of time going through the tool itself and just some tips and techniques for how you think about using it. Plenty of books out there, so I'm going to assume that some of you have never heard of it. So for the record, how many of you have never heard of A3 thinking? Okay, there you go. And how many of you have been using it for a while? Okay, so and everyone else is somewhere in between there. So I'm going to make sure we're not going to go all the way back to square one, but I'll make sure you at least understand kind of where we're coming from. And really spend some time about how to use it for developing people. So how do we use this to get the thinking built in the organization? How do we use it to coach? How do we use it to get the right thinking? And lastly, a bit of call to action, because after all, if we don't act, then what's the point of being here? Only reason for being here, I'll say this now, is you learn for the purpose of action. So if you don't go back next week or later this week and take action on what you've learned this week, then this week was a waste. That's just by definition. So a lot of you have done lean. You know what lean is. Lean value add has to transform something. If you don't take action with what you've learned, the week was a waste. So don't make it a waste. Take action on what you've learned. So a little bit about what A3s are about, and I'll kind of show you some examples of what this really means. First is, where does A3 come from? Well, for a lot of you, you're very familiar with what A3 means. It's just an international standard for a certain paper size. For those of you that are, U.S.-based, we like to do everything differently, so we're kind of pretty much the only ones that don't use that standard. But it's just a size of paper that's about 11 by 17. Now, so what's special about that? Well, what we're really saying is that all those presentations, all those 50 pages of PowerPoint, all those 40-page Word documents, all those things that we spend hours and hours, we want to get it down to one page. So what we're really saying is waste-free report writing. And that's what it's about. All it is report writing. It's about getting it down to one page. There's no magic in the one page. Again, it's about the thinking that we capture in that. And we can't capture everything, but it's standardized and it's simplified. That's the keys. And I'm going to talk about each of those points. The simplified is, let's spend a little less time generating PowerPoint. So I regret to inform you, I'll be using PowerPoint to talk about why we shouldn't use PowerPoint. But we need to cut back on the amount of PowerPoint we should use, and I'll share a little bit of that. But the standardization, it's always the same. We can look at it and we know what we're going to see. That's equally important. It's also really a method for thinking through. So when people say A3 thinking, it's really a method for how we think through a problem. So from beginning to end, from problem definition to solution, how do we really think through a problem? And so that'll be what we spend the last part of the time on, is what is some of that thinking. Now, A couple things that I should say it's not, because there's a lot of misuse, just like any tool that comes out. We misuse it as often as we use it well. So first of all is that there's no one standard A3 format. There's no magic formula. Toyota has many. If you want to use them as a standard, if you want to use your shell for the standard, it doesn't matter, because there's not one format that says, here's what an A3 is. It should look like this. It should always look like that. Anything that doesn't look like this is just plain wrong. That's not true. Now, the danger in this is I actually saw one company spend 6 months arguing, debating, dialoguing, iterating off what their form was going to be. Now, that was 6 months of waste, I can tell you very clearly. So it's not the form. We'll give you a kind of a basic structure to be thinking through. Don't spend too much time on the form. You'll just simply be wasting your time. And ultimately, it's really not about the piece of paper. When somebody says, here's my A3, this is like saying, if somebody shows up and they bring you up to their wall and they have Gantt charts and all sorts of flow charts and says, here's my project. That's not your project. Your project is all the work that people do. That's just, that little chart on the wall is just a manifestation. That's all that is. It's just a representation of what that is. Your A3 report, when you bring an A3 to someone and says, here's my problem, that's not your problem. It's just how you've written down your problem. That's all it is. So it's just a piece of paper. We shouldn't put any more weight into it than that. Now, the reason I say simplified and standardized report writing is that we spend a lot of time in organizations really churning lots of calories and energy around generating reports and reviewing reports and not really being clear about what value we're really trying to get out of that. Now, just as an example of how badly I saw the problem early on is when I was at DT Energy, we had a team of continuous improvement people that we were building. And I asked each one of them to come with a presentation of their problem, the project that they were working on, and kind of review progress and results and how they were doing. And one of them, I can remember her presentation well. There were 27 pages. She was working with one particular department, 27 pages of PowerPoint on the history of that department. So these were photographs and organizational charts and when it got started and how many orders they processed, and 27 PowerPoint pages on the history of the department, and 2 on the actions that they took. Now, that wasn't what we wanted. So it really brings me to the point around standardized. Now, that wasn't really her fault. That was my fault, because we didn't have a standard way to report the projects. So she went off and she generated all sorts of mental calories trying to figure out what should I put together in this PowerPoint presentation. And she was just one person, every single one of them independently put hours and hours. There's no reason we should waste time reinventing the report. Right? We should standardize it so we have a format and we know what we're really working through. So we want to make sure we're not wasting our energy generating reports, reviewing reports, and having those conversations.
Okay, so again, some of the key points of this video. A3 thinking is really lean thinking. Without a change in thinking, the form will get you the same results. It's the thinking that will get you different results. And of course, the thinking is the plan, do, check, act cycle. Don't waste your time arguing over details of the format. Instead, spend time developing a consensus about the facts and the content. A3 is to standardize and simplify. Distill the facts into one page instead of, for example, a 50-slide PowerPoint or a 50-page Word report. Okay, the next item that we're going to look at is a life cycle engineering video, which kind of lays out the general format of an A3 form.
Hello, my name is Randy Heisler. I'm a managing principal at Lifecycle Engineering. Today, I'm going to talk about the utilization of something called an A3. The first question might be, what is an A3? It's very simple, and if you walk to your printer, right away you'll be reminded of what an A3 is, because the printer has A3, A4, A5, and A3 is the 11 by 17 size paper. Initially, this was created by Toyota as a problem-solving tool, something that could be used by a group of people in the field, quite simply, on a sheet of paper, to solve problems, to make proposals about larger fixes, and so on to management. The key thing about A3s is to use what we call A3 thinking. And A3 thinking really centers around something called Plan, Do, Check, Act. Today, we're going to focus on the plan portion, where we would use something that we call a proposal A3. And it's quite simple, and it looks like this. Quite simply, just describing using the whiteboard here to show that 11 by 17 sheet of paper. In this quadrant, what we want to identify in our problem statement or proposal A3 is a business case. Why are we doing this? What's it worth to the organization? What's the return on the investment in this type of a problem? We also, in this quadrant of the A3, we want to define current condition. What is happening out there today that we're trying to change? And we've identified, here's the problems, here's the things that are preventing us from achieving best practice. In this quadrant, we want to identify what the target condition is, which is usually 180 degrees from what our current condition is. If we've identified what our current condition is, now we can decide, what does ideal look like? What is our target condition when we have executed the plan? We also need to have an action plan. What actions are we going to take that will change our current condition and turn it into our target condition, our ideal, and achieving the business case that we'd identified? And also, if we have an action plan and we want to know as we're going forward if we are achieving, we want metrics. Some way to measure the improvement as we go forward. Because we're trying ultimately to achieve this business case, which in many cases might be our return on investment, and also identifying what that investment is. Quite simple way to solve problems, propose plans to management that can be done by floor employees in a very quick and a very planned way. Here is a very pretty one that was done in PowerPoint, where once again describing the business case, the current condition, the target condition, the action plan, and the metrics. If you want more info.
Okay, so again, some of the key points. Some of the key points of the video include the A3 can be used as a business proposal to solve a problem or to implement an improvement. The top left-hand quadrant in his format describes the business case. The bottom left describes the current conditions. The top right describes the target condition. And the next section describes the action plan. The final section describes the metrics. As we said in the previous video, not too important to get hung up in the exact format, but this is the basic way that the storyline of the PDCA cycle is told. Okay, now the last segment. Unfortunately, the source video that we had on Nemawashi is no longer available, so we're just going to go over some of the key points from the video. And this is where it kind of ties everything together. Now, one of the purposes of simplifying the information and putting it and distilling it onto a single piece of paper is that it's very easy to carry around a single sheet of paper to all the stakeholders involved and to build a consensus around the facts that are in the A3. So the important thing, like we said, like they discussed in the first video, is don't get hung up on the format, get hung up on the consensus. Get hung up on everybody agreeing on the facts. So an A3 sometimes can be an iterative exercise. You could start out with your business case, you could start out with what you think is the problem you're trying to solve, and you could be halfway through the process and all of a sudden discover that you're solving the wrong problem. So then it's okay to go back and refine certain points of information and then make sure that everybody's on board and that all the relevant stakeholders have been involved and that you have the best set of information that you can, the wisdom of the group, as far as getting a deep understanding of the problem, having a buy-in on the analysis, agreement on the course of action, and then on the metrics for the as you're reviewing what it is that you accomplished. So in advanced lean enterprises, the research and consensus building, all this stuff is done up front, and then the larger group meetings are more of a formality, not that many surprises, nobody throwing in monkey wrenches or that sort of thing, because all the the work and consensus has been built up front. So the analogy is, and the phrase for that in Japanese is called tilling the soil, or nemawashi, which is tilling the soil to make it easier for something to grow and thrive. Okay, so that's it for the Yellow Belt course. For those of you who are reviewing this at RW Lyall, you'll go ahead now and take the quiz portion of it, and I'll get the results automatically. So thank you very much for your time, and best of luck. Hope to see you guys in the Green Belt class.